Oh shoot. Okay, where did I leave them? Someone help me. Oh god, okay, found them. Found them. Oh jeez. Welcome to the English countryside. As an American living in England, I've become pretty familiar with the English countryside, though also in some ways not familiar at all because it's vast. About 90% of England is considered to be countryside. Which brings up another interesting point. People all over the world talk about the English countryside, but it seems that some foreigners are still a little confused on where exactly it is. This internet poster says, "British folk, what is the English countryside?" A podcast I'm listening to mentioned it, and it's a very evocative concept. But I realized I don't know practically what it is. Is it a place, multiple places, an activity, or a state of mind? Well, random internet philosopher, the easy definition is that the countryside isn't something like Disneyland that you buy a ticket and show up to while a man in a mouse costume greets you. Nor is it an altered state of consciousness. Unless you're talking about the feeling of being on mile 8 on what was supposed to be a 2-mile hike and you forgot to pack snacks. No, the English countryside is all the stuff that isn't in the towns or cities. It's the farming fields, it's the forest, and the moorlands. You don't really go to the countryside, it's just all around you. And in this video, we're going to learn what makes England's countryside so unique. First, let's rewind a little bit. No, further than 1992, keep going. Stop there, about 8000 BC, give or take a few years. This was the end of the last ice age, and as the weather warmed, forest expanded. At this point in time, England was covered in forests, small grasslands, and tundra. So how did we end up with the fields that are so recognizable in today's landscape? For that, we can thank the farmers of about 4500 BC. The introduction of farming meant that a lot of those forests began to be cleared. Prior to that, the lifestyle was hunting and gathering, which worked really well within the natural makeup of the land without too many changes. It doesn't mean that all of the forest disappeared completely. There are still notable ones around, like the New Forest and Epping Forest. They're just not as expansive as they used to be. But now, we need to fast forward to the Middle Ages. Now, these fields are operated within what's known as a feudal system. This is an open field system where peasant farmers are assigned a narrow strip of land to grow crops. And in exchange for the right to grow crops on this small patch of land, they would in turn pay a percentage to the aristocracy. Other areas would be held in common as grazing land. The Black Plague really sped up the process as it wiped out much of the population. Many of these farms were then bought by individuals who enclosed their properties. In more recent times, just over 100 years ago, we'd conquered the Black Plague, but there was another threat to the English countryside looming, and that was houses. Well, houses and the people who wanted to live in them. Residential growth in the 1900s made many people worried that the English countryside would disappear. And, as one person put it, will only be visible through a continuous hedge of houses and bungalows. Development was needed, yes, but some town planners saw the writing on the proverbial hedgerow and decided to form a committee to preserve the countryside. This brings about CPRE, Council for the Preservation of Rural England. And since 1926, they've been fighting to preserve the countryside and everyone and everything that depends on it. Over the years, multiple acts and regulations have been put in place to protect this land. This includes the National Parks and Access to the Countryside Act of 1949, which laid the groundwork for the creation of national parks as well as areas of outstanding natural beauty. It also addressed public right-of-way and access to land, which we'll get to in a second. The English countryside is really the gem in England's crown. It's the morning fog on a countryside lane. It's the walk home from the village pub. It's fields bursting with color that stretch out further than your eye can even see. It's ancient trees and woodlands, hedges filled with tiny fruits and the sounds of birds. It's gentle streams and wild, rugged hills and so much in between. And one of the things that stands out the most, it's green. Very green. I don't mean your average run-of-the-mill green. I mean green. A green that can only come from a place with abundant rainfall. You see, England is met with winds from the west, and those winds have traveled across a large amount of the Atlantic Ocean, picking up moisture along the way. When it reaches land, the air has to rise because the land sticks up out of the sea. And when the air rises, it cools down, meaning no more room for the moisture, meaning rain. And then, Green. When you compare actual rainfall amounts, it doesn't necessarily rain that much more in England than it does in other countries, but the rain here tends to be drizzly and longer lasting as opposed to intense one-off thunderstorms. This can really easily mess up your barbecue plans, but it means the English countryside is one of the most beautiful places in the world because of it, which is hard to keep in mind when your burger bun is drenched, but easier to appreciate when you get out into the fresh air and appreciate the greenery around you. Another fascinating feature about the English countryside is the public footpath. And if you're English, you might be wondering what's so fascinating about that. Well, this is a feature that many people in other countries don't get to experience, the public access or right-of-way through private land. Paths like these connect the countryside together, so you never have to worry about trespassing while you're walking, rambling, or running through various fields and countryside destinations. Many public footpaths used today have been in use for hundreds, if not thousands of years. At one point in time, travel by foot was the only option, and people still had to move from place to place. Some of these pathways date back to 5000 BC, as traders used them to move from tribe to tribe. You've also got Roman roads and tracks, as well as those started by the Anglo-Saxons. Now, originally, footpaths like these were not designated by law. Instead, they were unofficially considered to be public based on evidence of public use over the years. But with more and more people privately owning land, something needed to be done to make sure that these public footpaths stayed public. This was part of the National Parks and Access to the Countryside Act of 1949. It created what was known as the Definitive Map, which is a legal record of the public rights-of-way. The map is updated by local councils, and it can actually be used as evidence in court. It's not called the Definitive Map for nothing. Over the years, there have also been campaigns to help save public paths that haven't been added to the Definitive Map. One of these was the Don't Lose Your Way campaign in 2020 that helped save over 40,000 miles of public pathways. Another iconic slice of English countryside life is what is known as a hedgerow. These are not hedgerows, these are sheep, but in total, Britain has over 430,000 miles of hedgerows, many of them in England. And often these hedgerows go back as far as 800 years. They were first planted around fields to keep in grazing livestock, like these, and to be boundary lines between farms. They come in all shapes and sizes, often being a mix of shrub and tree species like hawthorn, blackthorn, hazel, and ash. Medieval hedges are usually curved at the end so that the oxen could turn a plow, but the hedgerow planted around the 18th and 19th century tend to be straight. To lay a hedgerow is a skill, and done carefully by partially cutting the stems and bending the trunks over sideways. There are actually annual hedge laying competitions in the UK, and the National Hedge Laying Society recognizes more than 30 styles of traditional hedge. One of the best parts of hedgerows is that they're great for wildlife, attracting woodland species, insects, lizards, mosses, fungi, birds, mice, and more. Bats and moths also use hedgerows as spatial cues to move across the landscape. And, did you know, the hedgerows suck carbon out of the atmosphere to help reduce agricultural emissions. You might drive or walk past a hedgerow without a second thought, but they're doing a lot of good for the countryside. Unfortunately, hedgerows have been removed at a faster rate than they've been planted since World War II. This is due to a couple of things like changes in farming practices and damage and neglect, but it's not good for the wildlife that depend on them. If you're interested in learning more about how to protect the hedgerows, you can do your part by going to Natural England's guidance on managing hedgerows, and the National Hedge Laying Society offers courses across the UK on the skill of hedge laying. And that brings me to my final point. In some ways, the English countryside is beautiful because it was designed to be this way. Unlike some natural areas that are completely untouched, the English countryside is touched. First by the ancient footpaths of England's earliest settlers, then by precisely designed hedgerows to divide up the land. But that's part of the charm. It's Mother Nature meets human history. It's wild animals finding homes in manicured hedgerows. It's not untamed beauty, but beauty created and cultivated by the people who have lived here for thousands of years. And it's waiting for you to explore. Just make sure to leave no trace, treat it with care, and don't forget to pack the snacks. Or maybe that's just the American in me talking. Hope you've enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you next time.